So, no, we won't use the word Celtic. In fact, we're going to use the word Brittonic or British today. So, look, I've got to be honest with you, right? I do the lecturing, right? And any crude remarks, I do, okay? Not you. That's what you pay me to do. Right, so I started off at the beginning of the week. I thought, right, I'm going to do a lecture looking at the archaeology of art in a unique period in our land's history, okay? And I'm going to use the proper term Cymru. So I thought, right, work for our art that illustrates the Welsh princes. And I came up with about 10 slides, and I thought, that's not really a lecture. I did it for an hour. And then I thought, what I'm going to do, I'm going to also do a comparison with the archaeology of art in Cumbria. Roughly, the dates were a bit mixed up, and I thought I'll do a bit of a comparison, see if I can see any comparisons. And I thought, right, there are keen comparisons. If you've heard of the poems of Taliesin and the Black Books of Carmarthen, you'll see that there's a link with the people of Cumbria and the people of Cymru, Wales. But that only lasted an hour and 20 minutes. So I thought, right, what I'm going to do, because I've got my little Cornish pixie, Peter, I thought, right, what I do a comparison with Cornwall. And strangely enough, all three of these areas compared, and their experiences in the archaeology, in the sense of carved art, in the sense of a little bit of literature I chucked in there as well, because this is meant to be the archaeology of art. And then there were links with language, carvings, experience of kings, how our lands developed and stuff. So all these little comparisons, I thought that's a nice chunky lecture. So that is not meant to be anything crude, but it's a standing stone that has a limited amount of carving on it. Some are extremely ornate, and that wonderful knot work that you see on stones from Cumbria and Cornwall, hence why we're using the C and not the W word there. And the idea of a carved stone is very much a link between those three C's. You don't really see carved stones carved around the period that we're talking about. And what period are we talking about? We're talking about post-Roman, roughly to the Normans, and in our land, in Cymru, we're talking up to the year 1283. And then history as far as we know it, within our lands of Cumbria, Cornwall and Cymru ceases to be anything other than Norman. But if you listen to Peter, and you listen to anyone in Cumbria, and you listen to anyone in Cymru, you'll see that little bits of our history have survived from those times. And I thought this was going to be a bit of an over umbrella view of what I wanted to do over the next few months. So there you go. That's not art, but what it's doing, it's portraying what people felt Wales was about in the 1500s, 1400s, but a completely invented costume, roughly in around 1716 or somewhere like that. Our whole British landscape, the history of our land was completely reinvented. With the Act of Union between Scotland and England in 1707, and the fact that Wales didn't exist as a political entity, Cornwall didn't, nor did Cumbria. With the Act of Union between Scotland and England, and then eventually Ireland, people wanted to see a unified identity for our land, and to have people with their own little costumes in this area, and then the idea of the Scots having kilts and tartan, all fictitious and invented, and we had these silly costumes, which children still wear to school, thinking that this represents our far distant past, and it doesn't. So what we need to do, we need to turn to the very archaeology, or the very carvings, or the very little links that we see illuminated in manuscripts. And a very interesting thing is that where manuscripts don't survive, in Cornwall and Cumbria, our wonderful land. There's little works that have survived in the monasteries that are illuminated, individual bits of art themselves that describe Cornwall and describe Cumbria, and then we'll chuck in a bit of King Arthur.
So if they were all invented around what time?
These roughly in about after the Act of Union between Scotland and England. And what was happening, I've got to say a bit more about this. A chap by the name of Edward Clwyd, a Welsh chappie, was given the task to actually find a new history, not only for this land, but for England and Scotland. And people started to get together, and even the antiquarians of the day, Stukely and Aubrey and all these other people, started even using the archaeology to say that Stonehenge was built by the Celts, and actually Druids wandered around them stark naked and all the rest of it. All these things were invented to give a sense of identity. Bards, Eisteddfods, Gorseds, and all things that went a bump in the night were invented. Did you know that Winston Churchill was inaugurated a Gorsed in England and become a bard? It's Winston Churchill. It was fashionable for English people to become bards. So it's not a Welsh tradition at all. In fact, it's not a real tradition at all. It was completely made up. But what we need to do, we need to credit our real origins. And when you interrupted probably at the wrong time there, Jane, I was just about to say a little bit more about King Arthur. Those that believe in King Arthur deny he ever existed. Those that say King Arthur existed, their careers end quite promptly. And where am I on that? Well, King Arthur definitely didn't exist. So, there you go. This is one of very, 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 very few carvings illustrating a Welsh prince. In fact, Llewellyn ap Iorwerth, that died in the year 1240. Llewellyn ap Iorwerth was the second of the great rulers of Cumbria. Llewellyn the Great, Llewellyn Fawr. And there he is, a lovely carving, probably with beautiful colours in there, nice ochres, and painted, a bit of a gold crown. And let's not call him a prince, let's call him a sovereign leader of this land of ours. Cumbria had their own sovereign leaders as well. It was called the people of Reggae. And Cornwall, their last leader, died in 875. Their last king of Cornwall died, the name king. Let's have no jokes about the Duke of Edinburgh. He's a king and not a prince. But the Queen says he's a prince, which is the wrong thing. You have a king and a queen. I can never work this out, right? If you've got a sovereign ruler, there's a king and a queen. So I think that's nonsense.
He's not a sovereign ruler, is he? No. So he's not a king.
When I went to school, there were kings and queens. When you had a queen, you had a king. What I'm trying to say, I'm not going to get into the politics with you, Kathy. There's a point to be made. What I'm trying to say, prince and princess, right? King and queen. Isn't that the way it should be?
That's the way it has been.
Yeah, let's leave it there. Thank you. What?
No, it didn't sound like
No, a king was always seen to be above a queen, and therefore for the queen to be in charge, then the king has to be beneath her.
Well, I know this. But the point I'm trying to make, you're going to be trouble, you are. The point I'm trying to make, okay, you should sit next to Kathy. That's what all the Ellen and you'd be great in the back row. The point I'm trying to make is that to be derogatory towards people, they say that Wales was ruled over by a prince, right? There was never a king. The English never ever referred to anybody ruling in Wales as a king. But in our own work, in other people's works, they were kings. Okay? That's the point I'm trying to make. It's the perception. If you're the sovereign ruler of a land, you're a king, not a prince. But don't go there. So not Prince Llewellyn, King Llewellyn, pardon?
Problems with pronunciation, because if it's a Dyron Llewellyn, that translates as the tyrant Llewellyn. So we're not having that. We can't call him that. So he has to be something else. You know, it's. But anyway.
Well, I know this. I know this. But the point I'm trying to make is that to be derogatory towards people, they say that Wales was ruled over by a prince. But in our own work, in other people's works, they were kings. He's a
A
king.
lot to do
It's a
with
king.
languages.
Yeah, I know. But what would the point I'm trying to make is this sort of link between these lands. It's the experience. It's the same experience. That's the word I want to use. It's the experience of using titles and so on and so on. These are sovereign people. These ruled over their own lands. There was an independent Cornwall once with its own ruler, and you can see in Cornwall there are thousands and thousands of carved stones. Some with beautiful knotwork on, some really plain. Kathy has seen a load with me. And there are one or two left in Cumbria, but most of them have been destroyed. We do have a few in Wales, but most of ours have been destroyed as well. Nice collection of carvings in the Margam Stone Museum and the Old Gallery of the National Museum of Wales. There you go. Let's put this in as art. Lots of what we do see surviving from this period isn't in the form of carvings, is in the form of those libraries that were looted at the time of the dissolution of the monasteries. And the odd books were pulled out from the fire. Actually pulled out from the fire. They burned in all these beautiful books, right? And one or two were pulled out from the fire. And one of these was actually the Black Books, some from St. John's Priory, Carmarthen. The Black Book of Carmarthen. The reason why it's called the Black Book of Carmarthen is because the cover was black. Bingo. This is actually a nice illustration of Llewellyn. Okay, this is art within the leaves of publications that have survived. And there he is, Llewellyn in Latin, which means Llewellyn, Griffith his son, and David his son. Okay, it's a bit of a question mark there. Whoever wrote this wasn't exactly sure that Llewellyn had a son called Griffith. But put a question mark there. Wasn't really sure of the spellings. Put a question mark there. But he did exist. So he had two sons, Griffith and David, and both ruled. There he is, Llewellyn, and he's on his deathbed, and that's an illustration of our great kingly ruler of this wonderful land of ours. I'm exhausted already. What are we doing? Show a few maps today. Those coming on my day school tomorrow will be sick of.
I like maps.
We're doing loads of maps tomorrow.
Good.
Charging you 50 quid then.
Yeah.
So what happened? I just put loads in this today, right? So we got initially the kingdom of Gwynedd, roughly about the 1190s, ruled this area, and eventually they conquered this area here, Powys, and then they conquered Deheubarth, Ceredigion, and they started to have influence over Pembrokeshire, Gower, Glamorgan, a bit of Brecon, forget Gwent, it was never in Wales anyway. Yeah, it was. But so basically, as you can see, this is a big area that our sort of ancestors ruled over in the 1240s. It's quite a big area. There's bits of England that were ruled over by the Welsh that are no longer part of our wonderful kingdom. So, you know, vis-a-vis, bit by bit, this was our united land. This was our sort of... And throughout this wonderful land, and that's the point, back to the carving, back to art, this was a land of illumination. This was a land of writing. This was a land of carving. And what we do see is lots of the monasteries, the Cistercian monasteries, Dominican monasteries, Benedictine monasteries, and all the rest of it. Those wealthy, those new people who'd had a newfound wealth within the kingdom of Cymru, up until 1283, would give great donations to the church. And as we saw yesterday with St. Athan Church, the tombs of the Berkeralls family, they had their own little transeptal chapels alongside the church. And because they had actually built those chapels and put a lot of money into the church, they have a right to go to heaven. Okay? And the rest of the plebs, because they have made a donation to the church, they can go to hell. And this was the point, this is how people felt. So there was a lot of stuff being carved. There was a lot of art being created in churches. You know, it's all art. It's all from that wonderful period of this enlightenment within our fair land. Cumbria had the same sense of enlightenment, and so did Cornwall. Oh, I love chucking this on there, right? Not much Welsh art to go, actually. Because most of it has been destroyed, frankly, and that's the point. Most of the art bestowed on churches and monasteries and so on by rich, wealthy Welsh lords was inevitably destroyed. If you were English, your stuff remained and was taken out by your relatives and stuff, whatever. But anything to do with the old order was completely eradicated. This itself is the art. It's a coin. This is the only coin. This is the crunch of the whole thing today. This is the only coin of the only ruler of Cymru to survive. It's the only coin of the only ruler of Reggae to survive, Cumbria, and it's the only coin of the kingdom of Cornwall to survive. So the point being made there is that all these kings would have made coins like everybody else, but the eradication of these people's representations were so complete that they even got as many coins as they possibly could and melted them down. So the old idea of art, the old sort of ways, were to be eliminated. We know that through the Welsh knot. We know that through the Welsh language being banned as well. They were successful in Cornwall. They were successful in Cumbria. They didn't eradicate the language of Cymraeg. And all this is about a scorched earth policy, where you've got people wanting to keep their identity, it's eradicated. And that's not a political statement, that's fact. So we've got very little in the sense of carvings from the period of our princes. And we've got very little to show what happened after the Roman world as well. So when you come to the world of King Arthur, not much survives at all. But there are bits of stone with his name on. There's lots of writing about King Arthur, and obviously I don't believe in him. Moving on.
Which king was that? Who looked like Hos? Hosric.
Oh, sorry! I didn't even say who it was! So excited. No, that's Howell.
Oh.
Howell the Good. Howell Rex. King Howell. King. R-E-X means king. This is a Welsh ruler which says King Howell the Good. And he was respected by the English as a king, but people call him a prince. Don't make sense, does it? It's a very derogatory thing. Back to what I said earlier on. I think it's very derogatory to call the Duke of Edinburgh, well, you should call him a king. But that's me. We won't go there. Thank you, Kathy.
What about the title Prince of Wales then?
Bloody English.
There's another side to that.
I mean, the three feathers, where did they
Yeah,
come
there is
from?
another side,
Where did they
yeah, and
actually
it's very
come from?
plain. What's that?
The three-
15,
Yeah.
Germany.
Yeah, I know.
But it's all the English side.
Thank you. Let's just blame the English. Good. Get out of here.
Well, it was
Right.
an English thing.
Do you know what Michelle said to me? She said to me the other day, she said, I had a row with her. She was going to give me some money for something. I don't want any of your dirty money, I said to her, because she works for the Royal Mint. So she's a civil servant. And she said, what about you? All your students are English anyway, so I can be very careful, haven't I? Do you know what I mean? But this is a bit of an English bashing today, but it's not really, because
We can take it.
the English are the Anglo-Saxons who suffered as bad as the people in Cymru did. This is one thing people forget. If you want to be racist and you want to attack the English and all the rest of it, the English were taken over by the Normans, who were French. Those are the people who ruled. The last English king was in fact Harold, who died at the Battle of Hastings. And since then you've had, so we're not having to go at the English, we're having to go at those French people over the border, you know, in England.
And he was half Viking anyway, at least.
Yeah, chuck it in there. Anyway, the Normans were Vikings. But anyway, long story short, let's get back to this, okay? I don't want to lose all of you before I've even got the year going, you know? Gillian, you're Welsh, aren't you? Yeah, go for it.
No.
Oh,
Well,
You
half
could-
and half.
I have no ability.
oh, that's good. No, Lynn, you'll be the only one left. Our lectures will be so poor because every time you come in the room, not good. Anyway, so Reggae. It sounds like something from Brookside, that I used to love. He's a Reggae. Sorry, that was bad. Right, this area here, from sort of Galloway all the way down here is known as Reggae. Okay, and then links into Cumbria, and then links into Cornwall. So along this entire coastal seaboard, these are the lands that held out against waves of people from Germany, waves of influence from the Vikings, but slowly but surely, kingdoms retracted slowly. Cornwall seemed to go, and Wales by 1283 disappeared as a separate political, identifiable entity.
Well, it didn't when I was at school. We were told it carried on until the Act of Union, which was a lot later than that.
1536, I do the date year, not you. She's a rebel today. Do you know what it is, right? Between everybody in the room, right? Because Ellen's not here, Kathy's back on form. Because I think we're all afraid of Ellen, and we just like let it go with the flow. Right, so what we're going to do, I have the lights off now. I'm going to read what this says, okay? So here we go. With everything that we're seeing, from Cornwall up to Cumbria, and we're looking at the experience in Cornwall at this minute. In the wake of the Roman civilization and influence disappearing from Britain, with the collapse of the Roman world in the west by 476, these people in Cumbria and Cornwall had to find a new identity. And what they were doing, they were hanging on to the past. They were hanging on in these areas onto the Roman past. And I can say that because the legacy of Rome was Christianity. And these areas of Cornwall, Cumbria and Cymru are massively Christianized by Roman Christianity. This is why we get so many of these early carvings as representations of the old world. But the old world is Rome, not the Iron Age world that existed before the Romans got here. And when we look at the likes of Cornwall, and when we look at the likes of Cymru, there obviously has to be a relationship with the people over the border. And that has to be a mutual relationship of respect and at times downright slaughter and warfare. And we moved on to Cornwall completely. And one thing that must be said is when you think of places like Cornwall, you think of a place that's always been there. It's got a prehistoric landscape. It's got thousands of these stones sticking up there, and it's part of England. You say that last bit is part of England, people of Cornwall get very upset, don't they, Kathy, Peter? But for a long time, people used to say about these three areas that Cornwall itself, nothing happened between the Romans leaving the area and the Normans started to go into that landscape. I said this yesterday. When I was in school, I had two history teachers, and both of them said, because there's no evidence being excavated, and this was in the late 1980s, because no evidence has been excavated, nobody lived in Wales between the Romans leaving and the Normans getting here. There's no evidence. There was evidence. There's those carved stones. There's one or two archaeological sites out there that's been excavated. There's those documents that are deeply illuminated, telling of the past. And again, it's thanks to those documents that we're able to understand the likes of Cornwall. We're able to put a little bit of meat on the bones when we get some of the writers like Nennius writing about King Arthur and all those things that go bump in the night. That stuff must come from somewhere. Just because there's not a lot of evidence on the ground, those standing stones with carvings on in Cornwall must actually mean something. And one thing that the archaeologists across those three areas that we're mentioning is to try and reinterpret the past from what we've actually got. And there is actually quite a lot out there, actually. It's not just about the carved stones. It's not about the illuminated work. It's about folklore, the stories, and actually when you start to excavate these sites, you actually start to get the pottery. You start to work out, in fact, that this is real archaeology. where the likes of the rest of Britain was going to absolute hell. Hengist and Horsa, in 446 I think it was, landing up in Kent Way or wherever it was. And there was all that butchery and all the disease spreading across England and into other parts of the land as well. The likes of Cymru and Cornwall, not too much sure about Cumbria on this one, were extensively trading with people from the continent. Tintagel has been extensively excavated, and so is a site at Dinas Powys. And at Dinas Powys, what we found in the 500s and the 600s, parts of our landscape were illuminated with the trade in goods, with places as far off as Syria, where we get glass vessels being traded, and amphora being traded, and pottery, and coins, and metalwork, and this and that. England's going to hell, but we're not. We're hanging on to the old Roman trade links, and that's something to be proud of. We've still got the ability to carve things because we've got excess money. What's going on over the border isn't a mass genocide, it's a rewriting of people's mindsets. And what I mean by that is you'd have a very powerful Anglo-Saxon family coming into a community of 100 Roman native Britons and all the rest of it. And they'd say, right, we've now got weapons bigger than you, right? We're going to rule over your village and now you're Anglo-Saxon. If you don't do what we tell you, that's it. That's how it's always worked over the border. It happened with the Normans. The Normans sweep into England and they kill every single member of the English aristocracy, bar one or two. They replace the complete structure, and now we're into a land of Norman England, where in fact people in Cornwall, Cumbria and Cymru are actually saying, no, we're not going to have this. And we resisted for a long time. In Cornwall, for example, they had a keen identity for over 700 years. Most of our cathedrals in Britain haven't lasted that long. They kept their identity. We in Wales lasted a little bit longer. And in Cumbria, it went to pot a lot sooner. Because they didn't just have to deal with people coming over from the continent. They had to deal with people from up north with fictitious kilts on, and people over from Ireland. So they had a lot more to deal with. But again, those carvings, those very fine carvings, still remain occasionally in the landscape of places that we're mentioning. Right. It does dive back and forth. So what we've got, we're back to Cumbria again. The Black Book of Carmarthen. No! I know that's Times Roman print, and that's not the original one, alright? And it's not black. Okay, so that's fine. We got that one over and done with. But this Black Book is important because it tells us about what's going on in Cumbria and Cornwall. And it, without the carvings, without anything surviving, but it's actually telling you that these lands were quite illuminated. Wonderful stories of burial places of kings. Wonderful links with the people of the north, the kings of the north. And we all spoke the same language. All that sort of language, sort of, you know, there was Latin, Cymric, there was those languages were all sort of together, and it was in stones and all the rest of it. Those are the common links. And luckily, we're writing some of it down, because most of the cathedrals and abbeys and whatever, that big libraries, at the time of the dissolution of the monasteries, in 1540 odd, in those areas, the books were just chucked into the fire. There weren't any antiquarians to grab the odd book out of the fire. Antiquarians did exist in the 1540s. John Leland, for example, great antiquarian, writer, geographer, cosmologist for the king. Right? John Leland was writing these things down. Right? And there were one or two other antiquarians who were grabbing books out of the fire and saving them. And those bits of history, lacking those carvings and stone, it's all actually written down. So it's great. So that's the fine. That's actually one leaf of the Black Book. Again, a bit of illustration there. It's going through one of the poems. It's full of poetry. Got a lot more information. It's full of poetry, and it's through those poetries, myths, and legends that's all we've got. Because scraping in the ground is a lot more difficult. But if you're scraping in the ground and you find bits of pottery from the continent, and you find these little clues, the illuminated works actually give a little bit more onto the story. Again, linking directly into the religious thing as well. Has anyone ever seen this?
No.
Well, it's sort of from Chris over to here. It's a big carving. And this is one of those carvings I mentioned that was actually bestowed upon the order that from the 1400s at Abergavenny Priory. This is actually still there, Abergavenny Priory. When they're ripping all the other wood and all the rest of it, this huge carving survived. It's massive and it's still there today. You can go. The name is St Mary's Priory Church in Abergavenny. That's still there. That is referred to Jesse, father of King David. Okay, so that's at St Mary's Priory. That's still there. But most of these things have been completely lost and destroyed. They were chucked. There's stories, for example. If it didn't fit with King Henry's men, or it didn't fit with the Puritans, anything to do with the early history of those kings of those lands that we're talking about, also has to be ripped out of the churches and destroyed. This is the whole point of these wall paintings, right? They through other parts of Wales, they tell stories, some of them about the Welsh princes. All of them have to go. We get rid of all that stuff. It needs to be ripped out, destroyed. We need to get rid of all that stuff. This needs to go as well. Even though it's not directly linked, it was paid for by very wealthy people that were giving large amounts of money to the church, and this beautiful carving. So this actually survived. Back to this, there are written down stories that those individuals from the 15 and 1600s, and also the 1700s, and also the 1870s, may I add, the Victorians, they would rip out all the wooden stuff inside the church, put it into the church graveyard with any documents and books, and burn it. There are descriptions up and down the land of beautifully ornate carved pews, beautifully ornate carved rood screens, galleries in the Victorian period. This is being ripped out of churches and just being burnt in church graveyards. It's not King Henry VIII doing some of this. It's them as well. You know, lots of us are related to some of those people who were doing that to our churches. Bit of a shame that, because it was so close in time, and some of these links could have been kept. Okay, so this is a list of kings. It's sort of relevant. I know it's a bit away from that a minute, but to give a bit more context. So lots of these people are using their wealth to adorn churches and buildings with all this wonderful stuff. And I'll say that, how many of you have been to St Fagans and seen the reconstruction of that sort of that building, which is purportedly a representation of the home? I think it's King Llewellyn. Have any of you seen that? No. What they've done, they've got like a miniature palace associated with a Welsh king or Welsh prince with North Wales, probably Llewellyn, and they've done this representation there based on nothing. And they found the foundations, and they thought it may have looked like this, so we've adorned it all. We don't really know what it looked like at all, but they decided to put it there. So we don't really know what was being produced, really. But again, going back to 844, Rhodri the Great, King of Gwynedd, King, the first Welsh ruler to be called Great, and the first by virtue of peaceful inheritance and marriage to rule most of present-day Wales, from 844 to 878. So we were a unified land under a king once. and Arod, and we've got Huel the Good. Now this is a very interesting one. This guy produced the coins, very literary man. Obviously, lots of carvings going up in his time as well because there's lots of wealth. Wales is quite settled, everything's fine. We're friends with those buddies over the border. The Anglo-Saxons are our friends. And some say that the Huel coin may have actually been produced in large numbers as a gift by the King of Wessex as a gift for Huel to distribute amongst his people for the Huel support of the King of Wessex's campaigns in battle. So we were helping each other. We were buddies. It was fine. Some strange names there. You've got Iago, another Huel the Bard. That's another lecture. Cadwallon. There you go. You've all heard of Cadwallon.
Cadwallon and Iago is normal.
You would have to do this to me, wouldn't you?
Well, of course, for the RH, you always pronounce the H as well. Reggae and a hrotri.
Do you know, I don't want to do this anymore. Maredydd and Canan ap Huel ap Iaith. And there's Cadwallion. You've wrecked my flow now. Completely. Right, and there you go. You go through all these others. You've got a few more Llewelyn, Iago, Griffith, Bledin. Trahan.
That means wolf. Or little wolf. So it's like Red Indians, isn't it?
Griffith. You got an Owen. So this, and then you've got David, and then you've got Llewelyn Fawr, Llewelyn the Great, and then the last of the list, David ap Llewelyn, David son of Llewelyn, and you've got Llewelyn, son of Griffith, son of Llewelyn. Griffith was the other son of Llewelyn. Let's get this really complicated. You've got David, and then everything goes to hell. And why everything goes to hell is that any signs that there had been a Welsh kingdom were eradicated. Anything. Even Gwenllian, the daughter of Llewelyn, was taken out of Wales and put in a convent and denied her identity. She was put in a convent. She was basically, I think, 2 or 3 years old when her dad...
She was a baby. She wasn't even told what was... And her mother was the daughter of, Simon de Montfort.
Which doesn't make things better, does it?
No. So they were well up in the Normans.
Yeah.
To do that.
Exactly. And so if you're thinking about that, any carvings, any art would have been eradicated. You know, that's what was going on. Cumbria. Up to Cumbria. Now, do I take a break now? It's 11:32, or do I continue for a little bit longer? It's up to you. Steve?
Break?
Do you want a break? Should we have a break?
Mm-hmm.
Break! No! Before you go anywhere, right? I've got to ask you, are these better glasses than the other ones? Okay. Any questions?
No.
And what I've got to...
No queens. Lots of kings, but no queens.
They're all in barriers.
Let's not go there. You bought me this, didn't you?
I did.
Look at this. I gotta use it.
Get it cut.
Right. So, and one thing I'm going to say. We've only got one article of the week. How
I know. Not
disruptive of my soul.
I bought one, but it's the same as
Oh, yeah.
What do you want to
Kathy
know?
got any?
Yeah.
Right. I was going to say something. I went to Chepstow on Saturday. How do you know that?
You said.
Oh,
You said your pictures. Yeah, we saw it. on
Yeah.
Facebook.
What happened? Right. I went there with the idea. I was dressed finely as a pirate and all the rest of it. And then what I usually do is that I usually go onto the other side of the bridge, and there's a mini English Mary Lloyd festivity, wassail at the tree and all the rest of it. over there they got the best food and drink. So I took my son over there. My son went over there armed with a box to put loads of food in, right? Because he is my son, and yeah. Anyway, the organiser of the event said, "Oh, wicked! You play the bugle at 7:15. I want you standing in the middle of the bridge playing the bugle, and the whole set of events will spring up." So I'm thinking, right, okay, that's good. So I'd eaten so much that by the time I got to the bridge, there was too much crap on my lips and stuff.
No.
And it set things off then, and it was like, and it was really weird. I had my photograph taken and videos and all sorts of weird things. I think at this point, Michelle had done a runner to the car.
Very sensible.
Very sensible. It was great. It was a great thing. So anyone wants to join me next year, you got to dress up as a strange individual.
What's with the toast? They were hanging toast on.
Oh, they would. It's wassail. It's to the apple tree. It's
Yeah,
to.
but what was the point of the toast? The bread.
No, it's to feed the tree. It's an offering to the tree. And then what you do, you take some of the cider, right? I'm going to say something naughty to you in a minute. I don't drink. You know what's going to come. So they pour some of the cider on the tree, right? So my son gave me a drink. He said, "Use a drink. It's non-alcoholic." So I put it down, and then I realised, oh my God, I'm driving. So luckily I didn't drive back, but that was not good. So I was a bit tiddly for a little bit. And you can hear me blowing.
God help us.
Yeah, it did. I had people complaining I was too loud. Oh, and I was.
No. That's impossible.
And I was talking to the Mary Lloyds and kissing them.
You didn't have chocolate as well, did you?
No, I didn't.
That's a relief.
Right, so we're going to take the break. We're going to go around and do what we need to do and go from there. Thank you very much.
And look, I don't want 3 lots of
There's a
eggs.
magazine
I
if
bought
anyone
3
wants to
boxes, but
I've finished with it, so
It's
I'll
always
sit on
good.
round.
The voice of archaeology.
Frescoes and.
Hand it around. I want that around. Light. Action.
I'll put the kettle on.
Holly, thank you for that, Keith. Keith. Holly, put the kettle on. Oh, by the way, if anyone wants one of these umbrellas, let me know and I'll order you one. 106 quid, 15 because they're big ones. And they're specially printed. So if anyone wants one, they're 15 shekels. What?
I think I might have one of those.
Oh, Dennis, we've got to have a little money.
They're on the spot.
It might not be as
If
much.
there aren't enough cups in
But what
the-
we'll do, I'll let everybody know.
Cover
So
that.
there's 3 people at least interested in an umbrella, yeah?
Yeah.
I'll have one.
I'll just put one down for Ellen because I know a flop. Jane, glorious Jane,
Kathy and Co,
Jane, glorious Jane. Does anyone ever used to remember that? It was like a spy investigation thing, and there was this person singing Jane.
No, I don't
Glorious
remember that.
Jane. And they were looking through a keyhole, and there'd be people dancing through a keyhole, and it was like, I'm moving on. I'll just take the money. I'll just. Right, let's get on with the last bit. Thank goodness. And ahar, Jimlan. Pieces of eight. Now you'll be mistaken for thinking this is somewhere in Wales, Cymru. You'll be mistaken for thinking that that's in Cornwall, but it's not. It's in Cumbria. A beautiful carved cross in Cumbria. And one thing that we do know is that lots of these carvings are far older than we ever used to think. So what you need to do, whenever you go to a stones museum and it says this stone dates from the 600s, add 100 years onto it. And there is one classic mistake I spotted yesterday when I was in St. Athan Church. When they originally surveyed those wonderful effigies in the church was in 1890, and nobody's done a formal survey of them since. And back in 1890, they didn't have thermoluminescence dating, they didn't have any dating to do with argon, they didn't have any carbon dating or any of these things, right? So all these things add to dating things, and they were just guessing back then the ages, and we haven't updated them since. Probably in a stones museum here, there are a few experts who believe that most of the stones in the stones museum, with the dates that they got there, even 800 years earlier. So that's the thing. But obviously this puts her in the age when this kingdom of Reggae was still up and running, basically in about the 800s. It's a representation of Christianity. Beautiful knotwork on there. And this could be nicely at home in Ireland, Cornwall, Cumbria. If we zoom in a little bit more onto the detail, there we go. Beautiful knotwork here, and this, lots of the work in Cumbria was then influenced by the Picts over the border. And I've been wondering whether I should do Pictish art again. And the reason why I've been wondering about doing Pictish art again is simply because they've made so many discoveries about recent Pictish art. So we might think about that one, but that's not next week. Moving on. Lichen. Okay, there it is. All over it. So that obviously gives age. There's about 4 or 5 different varieties you can identify there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that gives an idea of age. So whenever you're looking at these stones, you've got to think about, is there any growths on them? Is there any bacteria and so on? Moving on.
Well, there is one species that only grows on ancient stone monuments.
Are you talking about the red one?
No, the red one is one that happily thrives in fairly polluted environments and is called Cymru Archaeology Cymru.
Did you know that?
It lacks nitrogen.
I'm just moving on. Just move on. Move on. Just sort of get on with
That's
it.
my undergraduate thesis. Lichen.
Yeah, I tell you what, Adam, just ask her.
I've forgotten most of them.
Reggae. The extent of Reggae, Cumbria, is disputed. Some believe it went all the way down to Liverpool, linking with Cymru and Chester. Others believe it went all the way north as far as the centre of Scotland. However, it was a very large area that spread over Lancashire, Cumbria, Yorkshire, Dumfriesshire. The kingdom's centre was based possibly near the River Eden in Carlisle way, but we don't know because there's been a recent discovery about the kingdom of Reggae, which has been made in Scotland. Brilliant, so we're going to look at that. So the little that is known about Reggae is because it was categorically erased from people's memories, other than all those beautiful standing stones and stuff.
Well, except for the Mabinogion.
How did you know it was? Oh yeah, I know it was in the Mabinogion.
Reggae is mentioned. I can't remember anything.
I want Ellen back. I really do. I really do. The kings. Shut up about the Mabinogion. Kings come from the poems of Taliesin. The kings of Reggae come from the poems of Taliesin. The likes of Urien and the king of Catraeth and Reggae.
So Catraeth is Catherine.
It is known from the poetic sources that under Urien's leadership, who was a king of Reggae, fought against the encroaching Angles, and obviously the Saxons, and then he was betrayed by one of his own allies. And all this is happening around 585 in the 580s, and this smells a little bit of King Arthur of the North. The Battle of Catraeth, fought by the British to try to recover Catraeth after Urien's death, was a disastrous defeat for them. Athelfrith, the victor of the Anglo-Saxons, probably received tribute from the kings of Reggae, of Strathclyde and Gododin. There's a name, Gododin. You often hear about the legendary land of Gododin up north, sort of all that Reggae area as well. So even though these things are myths and legends, they can be found on the ground, and definitely now in the archaeology. The area we're looking at is, again, this is a little bit more like it. The area of Reggae, we mentioned the area of Gododin, flowing all the way down here. Big area, very big area. And with their sort of own sense of identity, that's what we're talking about, similar identity to us and the people in Cornwall. And one thing I wanted to say, and it was probably Jane interrupting, or Kathy, in England, we don't have, in the main, these beautifully decorated stones. We don't, because in England, particularly in the likes of Wessex, Wiltshire, and Sussex, and bits of Kent, and so on, they don't have the type of carved stone that we've got. But it didn't mean to say it didn't exist. Whatever stones did exist, 99% of them have been erased from the planet. They've been used for other purposes. So this is that area there. They went through Hadrian's Wall. This itself is a leaf from the Book of Taliesin, which Kathy's right in mentioning the kings of Reggae. Lots of these. This actually also survived alongside the Black Book. There's a separate Book of Taliesin, and there's stuff in the Black Books anyway, so don't get them too mixed up. But these were actually saved. These were saved by the same antiquarian when the library at St John's Priory in Carmarthen was being set alight. So they just saved these things, and lucky, because if these things hadn't been saved, what would happen if these things hadn't been saved? Practically everything that we know about Reggae would have been destroyed. Most of what we know about Cornwall and the Kingdom of Cornwall would have been destroyed. It makes you ask that question. If there were more documents surviving from the past, we'd know a hell of a lot more. Another point to be made here, a bit of a digression, is that when you think of amazing events in the past, like the explosion that occurred at Atlantis, and I do believe that Atlantis did exist at Santorini, it wiped out whole civilization, 1,628 years BC, Minoan civilization was wiped out because of this huge eruption. Right? Plato wrote about it. But if Plato's work hadn't survived, nobody'd be talking about the loss of the Minoan civilization. So these things surviving tell us a lot that we can't glean from the archaeology.
Can I ask who was Taliesin?
We don't really know who he was. He was a writer.
Well, it was a bard.
He was a bard. He was a special religious person. He was all these different things. But we're only going by what we're reading. It's a bit like, who's King Arthur? Go and ask me. Do you know what I mean? We don't really know. In my notes it says we do know and we don't know. So we'll leave that one there, Kathy. Okay? And I was sat down yesterday, and this is a great problem in investigation in archaeology, and how we think of archaeology and how we think of the past and how we think of history and all the rest of it. I was sat down with one of my Barry people last night, and we ran a discussion, very serious discussion. And we said, right, we've made a major discovery in the Barry area. Huge, big hill fort, and I mentioned it to you. And I sat down, if this hadn't have been sort of mentioned in 1981, could we have still found this site? Because coming to my Barry class is somebody that used to play in the banks and ditches that no longer exist. Would I have taken what he said seriously? Or is this intuition? How do you find these things? And what I'm talking about is that you've got to use different angles to try and eke out the secrets of the past. You can't just look in a book and think that what you're looking at is gospel. Like I did yesterday, there's different ways of looking at things. Book of Taliesin. Book of Taliesin. The Book of Taliesin is one of the most famous of Middle Welsh manuscripts. It's written in the Old Tongue, dating from about the 1300s. Though many of the 56 poems it preserves are taken to originate in the 1000s, 900s and before. The volume contains some of the oldest poems in the old language. Now, the problem is with this wonderful language across our land is that if I use my form of Welsh to Michelle's children, they can't understand a word of it. If Kathy spoke to them, they wouldn't be able to understand Kathy. And the problem is with the Welsh language is there's had so many different forms and so many different versions, it's very difficult to understand at times. particularly when people speak fast from North Wales. And there's a point to be made here. In fact, bits of the language that we use in our land are preserved in place names up in Cumbria. And obviously, the Cornish language has hung on by its teeth as well. There's all similarities in these. The poems, possibly, but not certainly, dating back to the 500s maybe, and to a real poet called Taliesin. Maybe he did exist, or maybe he didn't. Though these, if genuine, would have been composed in the Cumbrian dialect of the Brittonic-speaking early medieval North British, being adapted to the Welsh dialect, which is very similar, what we're talking about is these keen links with these peoples and these writers, and the importance of what we've lost that we can't see in carvings, but we can actually see in the very rare manuscripts that have existed, but based on the fact that we believe everything that's written in them, which is a danger. Because if you read works such as works by the Venerable Bede and Nennius, you'll believe wonderful things that maybe didn't happen. These documents are kept in the National Library of Wales, and they were saved by the antiquarian Robert Vaughan in the early 1600s, after they had been handed these manuscripts by another antiquarian who dragged them out of the fire that was occurring at various religious various religious houses across the country. Basically, when the libraries were being ripped open, right, the wonderful monastic libraries, some of them had thousands and thousands of books. Most people, 99% of the people who went into these monasteries to rip them apart had no idea what a book was. So they were useful in using as toilet paper. If people... Exactly. They were very useful in lighting fires. They also had gold leaf on them, and they had wonderful binding that you'd all rip all these things apart and toss it all onto a fire. So these things were being found. The king...
Did none of the books end up in other countries, France, Germany?
Oh, they did. We occasionally have occasionally people from the States saying, actually, somebody who was a relation to this person, who was a relation to this person, who had actually come from Ireland, who was related to somebody who lived in Wales, and this book came from a monastery, and I've got it in America. They do occasionally come up. They are occasionally found in America, and they date from the 1300s. What are they doing over there? But they are occasionally found. There is the black archive, and the black archive are all those things that we don't know have been found. Okay, there's in the Vatican there are secrets to what exactly happened to Owen Glyndŵr in documents down there, but they will not release the information. Weird things like that, I know sound strange, right? But they ended up in the Vatican because that's where lots of the archives went, to the Vatican. We can't get access to these things. I know somebody who's been trying to look at the archives associated with Owen Glyndŵr for decades, but we can't get access to it. We know what happened to Owen Glyndŵr, but we can't get access to it. And what the point is that so many documents are out there, but they're hidden because people want to keep them to themselves. I've got one or two books in the house that date. I've got documents in the house that date back to the 1700s that I wouldn't want to let anyone see because I was given them by people who said that they don't want anyone to see them and all the rest of it. So if I've got that on a small scale, what has somebody got with a lot of money? Kings of Reggae, Cumbria. Listen to this. The traditional royalty genealogy of Urien, one of the leaders of Reggae in Cumbria, and his successors traces their ancestry back to Cole Hen. Go on, Kathy. Old King Cole, who is considered by many to be a mythical figure, but some believe he was real. All of those listed for Reggae are verified from other sources. So these are some of the kings of Reggae. There's Machian Gael, there's Cynfarth Oer, there's Urian Regedd, and there's Owen. They sound very Welsh names, don't they? And these are rulers. And there's Rwan or Ruth. They obviously don't sound, but these are the rulers of Reged that have survived thanks to the documents that we find. Now this is interesting. An archaeological excavation. Bit of archaeology here. So let's do this one. Maybe I'll switch the lights. So here you go. Discovery of a lost stronghold of the Kingdom of Reged. In 2012, Pictish stone engravings led archaeologists to discover what could be the lost city of the Kingdom of Reged, not in the centre of Cumbria, but much further north. As they carried out excavations at a location called Trustees Hill, near the town of Gatehouse of Fleet in Galloway, north-west Scotland. There you go. Previously, the stronghold of this kingdom was thought to be in Cumbria, because it must be in Cumbria, because in Cumbria there's place names in Cymraeg in sort of which we'd understand. When I used to live in Cumbria, I was driving down the road with my fiance, and I was saying, that's a Welsh name there. Why have we got a quarry named after? And it was just really strange. It was just, I was not going all the way from one part of Cumbria to the next. You could get about 6 or 7 names in Cymraeg, in the Welsh language, and I never understood that back then. So, but the Kingdom of Reged, the capital of it, was much further north. After 1,400 years of its mention in old accounts, researchers were able to discern remnants of what indeed might be the stronghold of this lost kingdom. They discovered ornate horse ornaments and Pictish engravings depicting royal ceremonies which would have occurred on this site. So these people had access, not to just the land of the Welsh language, but they had access to the Pictish world as well. It was really cosmopolitan. The discovery was announced to the public in January 2017. The site is still under excavation. One of the lead researchers, Ronan Tulis, stated that their findings reveal structural ruins dating back to the 600s, smack bang in the time of the Kingdom of Reged. These originally belonged to a fortification system with timber-reinforced stone ramparts, an impressive site, supplemented by smaller defences, a really important site. And around 600, what we do see as well in Cymru, in Dinas Powys, Tintagel, other places in Cornwall, other places in Cumbria, and other places up north, they're really starting to become powerful. They're really starting to be the game changers. They're really starting to hold on to their origins, and they're doing lots of carving. These originally belonged to a fortification system. According to the archaeologist Tulis, suggested the presence of a royal stronghold. This is a type of fort that has been recognised in Scotland as a form of high status settlement of the early medieval period. The evidence makes a compelling case for Galloway being the core of the Kingdom of Reged. And the point being made there is this: always in history, the chess pieces move. It's whether you want to pick up those chess pieces and play with them is important. For so long, people hang on to the word Celtic, when lots of archaeologists and historians are saying that there was no Celtic invasion and all the rest of it and all these wonderful things. And also still in schools, and I'm sorry to say, Michelle's children, they're still not being taught the real history of their land, and they go to a Welsh medium school. Joe, one of them come over home the other day saying, why are we learning about Zimbabwe in the primary school and we don't have a clue about what's going on in our own country? She said, isn't it terrible what's happening to the people of Zimbabwe? You know, white farmers have done this and that and all the rest of it. And they're teaching them in the Welsh language. I'm thinking, what? What about your own land? It doesn't make sense. It's really frustrating that it takes a long time for this information to come down. Right, so not very long now, about another 6 or 7 minutes. Is everybody okay for that? Good? Lynn, you haven't got to run out with your tail between your legs, have you?
No, not this week.
Okay. I'm not saying you're a dragon, more like a witch.
Take cover.
Hey Chris, nice. The Black Book of Carmarthen lots more of this stuff comes from. Again, this was in the collection of antiquary Robert Vaughan, and it's believed to come from Carmarthen Priory again. We've already mentioned this. And it was obviously written before 1250. It's in vellum, 108 pages, lots of it missing. But what we do find is very important, like Cathy's Mabinogion. This is an important book that unifies everything that we've been talking about. The book contains a small group of triad stories about horses of Welsh heroes. Horses of Welsh heroes. I love that because I've just been to Chepstow and the Mary Lloyd and the horses and how important the horse is to all the mythologies across this landscape. The Ceffyl Dŵr, the water horse, constantly telling that one. But these are preserved in stories, in a story form book from before the 1250s. The odes of praise and mourning of great interest are the poems which draw on traditions relating to the heroes of Wales associated with Hen Ogledd, Old North Cumbria, and the surrounding areas. So that book itself has probably assisted the archaeologists to work where they're working in Galloway, to understand what the archaeology they're actually looking at means something. And especially those connected with the legend of Arthur and Merlin. So Merlin, Cornwall, that's where that comes in. So, oh shush! Oh, don't go there, just please, don't. And then it moves on. We have, oh, go on, Kathy, you do all this blooming Welsh stuff, because I know I can. Go on then, can you see that?
No.
Ddiddan Myrddin a Taliesin. Glad i'r coffath ar enaf. There. Madog a Myrddin. Myreddedd. That's the one.
Is it
That's the
raining
one.
or is there spittle flying everywhere?
But the interesting one is this one.
Your throat, yeah.
Cantar Gair. The Cantar, that would be preserved in the Cornish dialect. Okay? The K in Cornish. Exactly. The verses of the graves, these are about burials to various kings that are found across the landscape of South Wales. And just quickly, we've got a few more images at the end to finish up on. This itself, based on the Cornish stuff, you're going to find this in Wales. And we've already seen it in Cumbria. So there's the link in the carvings. We started with carvings, going to end with carvings. That's what this was about. This beautiful, beautiful work here. Carved into the stones. Some are quite plain, like this one. Okay? No comments, please. Thank you. And we get lots of these on the roadsides. When we went to Cornwall last time, I think we gave up stopping at the side of the roadside looking at these, didn't we, Kathy? Because we were in a bit of a rush.
Well, unfortunately, the council had put in fake ones to dot alongside, which to make it, you know, the old Cornish route.
And I told you they were all real. So anyway, more of these. More of these. I'm just getting similarities. Again, more of these carvings. And the other thing as well is carvings don't need to be really ornate. They could be quite plain, right? And then obviously lots of these in granite. And I was making the point that there's so many in Cornwall, thousands of them. They've not all been recorded, including the ones that are new. They're still out there because Cornwall's had a bit of a weird history compared with the rest of Britain. It's been under English rule for a long time, but everyone in Cornwall doesn't class themselves as English. They got their own identity. Because Cornwall's so well spread out, lots of the carved stones have been left there and are still important within the landscape. Whereas, the likes of Lantwick Major, lots of your standing stones were used for building. Even one of the most famous, I think it may have been, was it the Howell Cross was found by Iolo Morgannwg, and it was used as a footbridge over the River Ogby. Okay. It was the writing was face down, right? We've just reused our stones in Cornwall. Plumbing hell, I'm not moving that big thing over there. I can't be bothered. Let's just get another stone and use it. So there's different experiences. And in England, where stone is scarce, wherever these were, they would have used them for building anyway.
If you want to see really big, good carved stones still standing there, the Isle of Man is the place to go.
Oh yeah, but that's another thing altogether. Oh, don't complicate it by the Isle of Man. But actually, do you know what we should do? Right, that we are actually the archaeology of art in the Isle of Man would be fascinating because you know why? Because that would not only be prehistoric, that would be Viking, and that would be later Christian and all that guff. We'll do that one. So you've got a carving of representation of a saint or some other religious figure.
It's probably Jesus because he's got his arm sticking out the side.
Jesus loves you. We didn't see, and the problem is with some of these standing stones, we actually went to the Nine Maidens, didn't we? But we didn't see this because it had been moved. It had been moved. And look at this here. It's almost, there's writing on it. So you've got some Latin text up there. You've got a cross at the top. You've got these weird spiral designs. Sort of weird figures on this side. So this is different from the rest of Cornwall. Lots of carvings in Cornwall. In fact, there's lots of styles of carving in Cornwall. It's not just the knot work. Some of it is illustrative of earlier forms of art. There's lots of it there. Very similar to a lecture on what we could do with the Isle of Man, but that's not going to be for a while. So again, nice little, sort of a small little wheel cross that would be very familiar around here. You can just see that there would be sort of spaces. If you go to the Stones Museum at Merthyr Mawr, you see ones. So you've got that there, that there, sort of wheel cross. And again, another one with a top that's been broken off. More of these figures. Okay, if you want to put Jesus on the cross there you go. Again, the lichen. The lichen. There it is. I'm nearly at the end. Jesus.
Yeah, his legs are crossed.
Oh, yeah, he's been nailed together, yeah.
There he is. He's yeah, there he is. And what I wanted to say was some parallels again. This is not go back and forth again. So just the other Cornish image. This takes us back to Cumbria again. And the reason again, another point I wanted to make is that the force of carving in stone is not just for sort of upright crosses. It's sort of associated with tombs as well. This is not really a tradition that we find here in Cumbria or Cornwall. But up in Cornwall, they've got what's known as hog-back tombs that look like the back of a hog. So you got this tomb, which is a saint's tomb, which would have been placed on top of a burial. You've got a warrior here. Very different, but the point to be made here is that they're carving in stone. They love carving in stone. They love making these things permanent. Because in other parts of the world, this is a strange concept. In other parts of the world, to make something permanent, you've got to make it out of timber. Because when timber rots down, it goes back to the earth, and that's seen as permanent. Yeah? But our concept of permanent is something carved out of stone. So it's definitely permanent. But this is sort of typical Cumbrian, and slightly unique, really. There are other examples. I don't even know why that one's there. And I do believe, as we end... Oh, actually, I chucked that. That was part of the lecture yesterday, right? And we found out yesterday that well, not yesterday, I already knew. They mucked around with the architecture in the church so much that gargoyle there has been placed in there in the past 100 odd years. It was never, 150 odd years, never been part of the original arrangement. And in the past 50 years, all the render on the back has been ripped off in living memory, and all these wonderful things. So you've got to be very careful when he goes to these places. But that was yesterday. And this image here. Strangely enough, if you want to talk about art and carvings, you've got to look at weird things. The only real way of identifying an Owen Glyndŵr is actually from Owen Glyndŵr's seal, that's been found on documents in Rome and France. And that's how you know what Owen Glyndŵr looked like. There are a few other illustrations of him, but that's what he looked like. And this is the seal of Llywelyn ap Iorwerth, the great king of Wales, who died in 1240. And that must class as a carving in a form, because it would have been carved out first in the seal to actually create that in a form of wax in the first place. So we're going to end on that image. Let's have lights, camera, action. I thought I was in a studio then, wearing my leathers. Are there any questions?
Yes, what's the first stone that you showed at St Michael's Mount? The very first one.
St Michael's Mount there. Oh yeah, it was St Michael's Mount. It says St Michael's Mount. Oh yeah, it is St Michael's Mount. Yeah, St Michael's Mount there.
Yeah, saw that one.
Yeah. Any other questions? I've got to ask, have you all enjoyed today?
Yes.
Thank you.
Rubbish.
Good, good, good. You have a wonderful lecture coming next week.
Alan,
What's
Double-
next week?
I'm going to look at my book before anyone moves. I do have this written down. Studio, I wrote this down on Monday. Look at it. I do know what we're doing, but I can't work out what it is a second. But it'll be very good. Whatever we do next
whatever it
week.
is, it'll be fantastic.
It'll be fantastic next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
And I will
Lenny.
see you all next week, darlings.
I'll see you tomorrow.
If there's no more questions, well, ask me whatever. And I'll see those tomorrow. And hopefully I can wind Garth up next week even more by saying, look, we got Ellen in the room, we got Dirty Pete in the room, and it's all happening. Take care, guys. Thank you very much. See you all next week.
thank you.
Well, at least one of you said thank you. One of you's appreciated it.
To go